The Girl in the Car by Corey Lamb. Throw the shit in the car! Come on! I heard the barred door of the corner store come to a rickety slam as I hauled the 2 cases of beer into Jesse Palmer's 72 Camino, tripping over myself as I lunged into the back seat. The tires spun before I even closed the door behind me, just as the elderly attendant hobbled out after us, waving his cracked baseball bat around the air like he was swatting at a wasp's nest, just out of reach of his liver-spotted arms. You'd think after the second time he'd been ripped off for a few packs, the guy would consider buying a rifle, or at least learn enough not to take a 20-minute dump when he's the only one behind the counter. Lucky for me, and by the grace of God, he hadn't. You grabbed the fucking Luckies? Dwayne Rogers yelled from the seat next to mine as he slapped me in the back of the head with his bony fingers. I knew Dwayne from Little League Baseball. That is to say, when Dwayne was 13 years old, he played on my team of 10-year-olds to avoid progressing into the live pitch games. My dad was the coach, and I guess he knew Dwayne's dad from work. Therefore, I spent 2.5 baseball seasons watching Dwayne's stepmom half-heartedly cheer for the fact that Dwayne had somehow managed to barely stand out among a crowd of inattentive children who weren't yet old enough to grow armpit hair. Now, Dwayne found himself in the shady company of Jessie Palmer and her much older boyfriend, Thomas Simpson, though to be fair, so had I. Tell me he didn't get Luckies, Tommy mumbled through the lit cigarette in his mouth. The guy had to be in his 30s, but I never had the nerve to ask. It was the caterpillar mustache, or maybe the cracks around his eyes. I often wondered how he and Jessie ever met. It's what we drank last weekend, I spat, still catching my breath from the run. I remember the label. Yeah, Thomas sneered, when we had to pay for it. Dwayne grabbed the back of my neck and pulled my head closer to his. When you steal booze, he whispered, loud enough for the whole car to hear. You steal motherfucking booze, not this pisswater bullshit. He threw my head back at the opposite end of the seat, almost slamming my face into the window. I looked to the passenger side mirror. Jessie was checking her makeup. She hadn't noticed. We might as well drive your ass right on back to the store, Thomas said, flicking his cigarette out the window. Pop that cherry a little harder. Dwayne snorted at this. Yeah, it's only a bat. Dwayne laughed, cracking one of the beers anyway. You can dodge a couple of swings, eh, Stevie boy? Sure, I'll just pretend I'm a baseball, and he's you at 13. You really only gotta dodge the one before the old man's hip goes out, Thomas snickered. Right, I said, laughing along for some reason, but I knew they weren't laughing with me. Jessie Palmer leaned back in her seat, reaching an arm out to Dwayne for a beer, opening and closing her hand in a gimme motion. Dwayne swatted it away and grabbed one of the Luckies for her. She smirked at me upside down, and I glanced away immediately, covering with an awkward smile as I searched for a way to deflect attention from myself. Hey, a deer, I said, gesturing out the window as my heart continued to race. There was a group of 3 of them, doe from what I could tell, hanging out on the side of the road, eating grass or flowers or whatever it was that deer did. Tommy bit down on his cigarette and sped up, veering the car towards the trio until the right side of the vehicle edged off of the pavement and started picking up dirt. The deer raised their heads in unison, paralyzed in the Camino's high beams. 20 points for the little one, Dwayne barked, finishing with a large slurp of Luckies. Tommy pressed on the car horn several times in rapid fire until he jerked the wheel and pulled us back into our lane again, laughing through his teeth as the terrified deer scattered into the woods. Don't be a dick, Jessie said, though with an unmistakable smile. Jessie was the reason I was there that night. She was the reason I did a lot of things. What, I thought our new friend back there wanted to see one up close, Thomas said, though I might as well have not been in the vehicle. Hey, a deer, Dwayne said in a horrible mock voice, sticking out his uneven front teeth and crossing his eyes. Let's all look at the deer. Dwayne backhanded my shoulder, hard. You've lived in East Texas how long, dip-ass? He added, jeering. I shouldn't have said a goddamn word. That's all right, Thomas said, taking a long drag of his cigarette. He don't strike me as the hunting type. I caught Thomas' eye in the rear-view mirror. I shook my head. You see, he carried on, holding a hand out to frame his statement, they're mindless creatures put here for our benefit. They eat, they sleep, they fuck, and they multiply. Too much for their own good. so we keep 'em in check. Dwayne slurped his beer again, laughing, but ultimately contributing nothing. They're nothing to stare at, Tommy finished. Yeah, and what does that make us? Jessa asked, nudging Tommy's arm several times with her fist. Killers, Tommy growled, winking as he took another drag. Jessa folded her arms and looked back out the window. Well, I wouldn't want to kill one, she mumbled. Tommy watched her, staring for a moment before glancing back to me in the rearview mirror. Oh, see what you did, Stevie? You got her all worked up. Jessie pulled herself away from the window. Leave him alone, Jessie said, slapping Tommy's arm playfully. He's just a kid. The funny thing was, I was older than Jessie by a full 3 months. And I'm fine, Jessie said to Tommy before turning back to face me. Thanks for the beers, Stephen, she said, giving me a wink that momentarily justified the whole trip. Really? I smiled in return, doing my best to pretend I didn't like the wink as much as I did. She turned away just as I was starting to forget where I was. Might want to be careful, Jess, Dwayne hissed. I think you gave him a stiffy. The smile instantly drained from my face as Tommy laughed, choking a bit on his cigarette smoke. I shot a quick glance to my pants, and then to Jessie. I felt the blood rushing back to my face. Thankfully, it was dark out, so no one could tell. Dwayne, you're such an asshole, Jessie said, turning to punch him in the leg. He reached out to grab her arm, but was swiped away before he got the chance. Don't pay any attention to him, she said, craning her neck to face me. He's a repressed homosexual. Thomas snorted through the end of his third cigarette and started coughing again, heavily. Dwayne slowly sat backwards into his seat, glaring at Jessie as she stuck her tongue out. I couldn't help but laugh along, however slightly. And just what the fuck are you snickering at, dipshit? Dwayne turned to face me, apparently choosing me as the easiest target of the bunch. I got the distinct impression that he wouldn't have dared say the same thing to Tommy. I began, hoping I'd find the rest of the sentence along the way. I'll bet I've gotten more action in one night than you've gotten your entire life. Stephen isn't into dudes, Dwayne. Jessie laughed, causing another death glare from Dwayne. She then started to quiet down before finally adding, Right? And turning to face me. No, I'm not, I said, a little too quickly. Girls, definitely girls. You ever boned a girl, Stevie? Tommy asked, rolling his window up. Jessie playfully slapped his shoulder again, then she turned around to gauge my reaction. Well, I don't. Hell, I'm betting he's never even kissed a girl, Dwayne growled. Not a one. My face felt as though it would explode. I reached for one of the boxes of Luckies, but Dwayne pulled it away, scoffing. You haven't, have you? Jessie asked, smiling slightly. Holy shit, Dwayne spat, choking out a laugh in between words. I was just fucking with you. That's fucking pathetic. Dwayne's laughter shook the car as I turned my head away from the group and to the window. This was the exact opposite of how I hoped tonight would go. How did I expect the night to go? Jessie and I would ditch Tommy and Dwayne, listen to some music maybe, go for a walk? Jessie, kiss the kid. Tommy growled through yet another cigarette. I could hear the grin on his face. Wait, what'd he say? I jerked my head back to face Tommy. I was sure I had misheard him. Jessie giggled, then leaned her head back over the gap in the center of the front seat. Her blonde hair cascaded down, practically touching the floorboard. How about it, Stevie? She said, puckering her lips and making a sloppy kissing sound. Make an honest woman out of me? She laughed. Tommy smirked and blew smoke at the dashboard. Aw, he ain't gonna do it, Dwayne taunted, his eyes bouncing back and forth between Jessie's lips and me. All I could think to do was smile at Jessie. As much as my insides were burning, I didn't have it in me to kiss her right then and there. She knew it. I knew it. Jessie winked at me, then pulled herself back into her seat. You sure you're not some kind of queer, Steve? Dwayne asked, composing himself however slightly. I'd say he was making fun of me if the question hadn't felt genuine. I choked. I had an opportunity to kiss Jessie Palmer, and I choked. He don't want to be kissing another man's girl. Thomas said, reaching over to pat Jess's leg. It was something in between a question and a statement, and then there was a pause followed by, I can respect that. Earning Thomas' respect wasn't something. I thought I wanted it until then. Yeah, that was it. Another man's girl. That's why I couldn't do it. Not because I'm a pathetic chump. Not at all. Dwayne leaned forward in his seat. You know, Jesse, I ain't ever kissed a girl neither. You can kiss my fucking ass, Thomas said, eyeing Dwayne through the rear view mirror. Jesse, ignoring Dwayne, propped one of her bright red sneakers on the dash and poked at Thomas' shoulder. Give me a smoke, she said in a faux New York accent. I smiled, though there was no way for her to know. Thomas shifted around in his bag, grunting as he shoved a hand into the pocket of his jeans and pulled out an empty pack of Marlboros. Dwayne, Tommy barked, tossing the empty pack into the back seat. Fresh out, Dwayne said, though I had to wonder if he was telling the truth. Course you are, said Tommy, before flashing me a quick glance as the car rolled to a stop at one of the town's intersections. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and guess our little tag-along buddy back there doesn't have any smokes on him either. After a moment of wondering if Tommy was finished with his statement, I spoke up. No, sorry. I hadn't thought of cigarettes. I never so much as held one that wasn't made of sugar, but had I known I'd be asked for a pack, I'd have brought 3. Tommy grabbed the wheel and took an aggressive right turn. Well then, he said, straightening the wheel. Looks like we're making another pit stop. My stomach sank into my seat. I was still recovering from the Lucky's heist. Ooh, I love this song, Jesse yelled. Ooh, I love this song, Jessie yelled, throwing herself toward the radio to crank up the volume loud enough to drown out my awkward squirming. I happened to catch Dwayne's eye with the corner of my own. He was staring at me, waiting for me to object, to ask to be taken home. But I knew that I wouldn't. I couldn't. Not now. You said you want to reach the sky. Jessie threw her head back and raised an invisible microphone to her lips, belting the lyrics into the roof of the Camino. So get up! She turned back to point at me, bobbing her shoulders up and down one at a time. I felt a bit of color run back into my face. The feeling's right and the music's tight on the disco nights. Hey, Jess, why don't you leave the singing to the pros? Dwayne snarked, pretending to snatch at the invisible microphone, but Jessie pulled it back, wagging a disapproving finger at Dwayne to the rhythm of the song. The feeling's right and the music's tight on the disco nights. Tommy laughed through his teeth. Jessie looked back to me, grabbed my hand, and sang the lyrics to me in an exaggerated production. The feeling's right, the music's tight on the disco nights. I could think of nothing but to smile back, nervously. Damn it. Jessie climbed in her seat a bit more and leaned in closer to me, singing a bit louder now. She squeezed my hands tighter. The feeling's right, the music's tight on the disco nights. I felt my gaze fall to her lips, but I jerked them back to her eyes almost instantly. I don't think I'd ever been so close to Jessie Palmer, the girl I had been crushing on since naps were a regular occurrence on the classroom itinerary, the girl I'd just stole 2 cases of beer for and was probably about to steal cigarettes for. Jessie gave me another wink and continued to sing. Tommy glanced back to the two of us, laughing again, probably making fun of me, but I was in a trance. The lyrics stopped for a moment as the beat carried us onto the next verse. Jessie was leaning in closer to me and pulling away, back and forth to the rhythm. She was getting so close, I could smell her shampoo, or maybe it was her hairspray. Coconut? No, almond. Both. She lifted my chin with the tips of her fingers, mouthing the words of the song. I was jello in her hand. My heart pounded into my throat. Maybe it was from the beer heist. Then again, maybe not. I wondered if she could feel it. She winked again, and before I could stop myself, before the gravity of the situation really registered in my brain, I kissed her. I kissed Jessie fucking Palmer. She fell silent. Everyone did. But she hadn't pulled back. Not immediately. For the briefest moment, quick enough for anyone to attribute it to shock, but long enough for me to know better. Jesse Palmer kissed me back. Dwayne stared in disbelief. Tommy's eyes were fixated on me, giving me a look that was neither anger nor approval. It was certainly a shift from his attitude 5 minutes prior, when he had outright told Jesse to kiss me. I wondered what was different now. "What the fuck?" Tommy began, but he was immediately cut off by Dwayne screaming, "Tommy, road!" But it was too late. Tommy jerked his head back to the front of the vehicle and pulled the wheel hard, but not before whatever it was that Dwayne saw rolled up and over the hood of the car, cracking the windshield straight across. Tommy slammed on the brakes, and we slid to a rigid stop in the center of a floating cloud of gravel. Nobody said a word for the first few moments. We just sat there, breathing in shaky spurts. Tommy cut through the silence by beating on the steering wheel. I thought he was going to break it off. Shit, fuck! He spat, his hands vibrating against the wheel. "What was that?" Jessa asked, trembling, and looking only at Tommy and not back to the object. But we all knew what it was. A thick dread swelled in my gut. I knew what we hit. "Who?" said Dwayne definitively, inhaling more than he was exhaling. "Who was that?" Thomas spun around to face Dwayne, throwing a hand to his throat. "Don't you fucking say that! Don't you fucking say that!" "Tommy, stop!" Jessa said, placing a hand on his shoulder, which prompted Tommy to turn on her, shoving her against the passenger door as Dwayne gasped for breath. "You shut the fuck up!" Tommy yelled at Jesse, the corners of his mouth twitching. "If you had stayed in your fucking seat, we wouldn't have." I opened the car door instinctively, which clicked the dome light on, illuminating everyone's horrified faces for the first time. "And where the hell do you think you're going, lover boy?" Tommy asked, wide-eyed. I didn't know. I was too scared to think. Too scared to breathe. "I'm gonna go check on." I gestured back behind the Camino to what was lying in the street. I couldn't even say it. "The fuck you are!" Tommy fired back, raising himself more in his seat. "It wasn't your fault," Jessa said. "It's dark. You didn't see it. We didn't do anything wrong. But if we leave—" "I'm going," I said, stepping out of the car and staring at the ground. I'd made it only a few paces before Tommy kicked open his own door and came charging out after me. "You get your fucking ass back here!" he roared, but it didn't matter. Nothing mattered to me but the sight of what was lying in the road, 50 feet from the car. A person. A woman. Tommy ran up, grabbed my arm, but his grip slowly loosened as his eyes fell on the same sight. She was a young girl, maybe 15 or 16, in what would have been a white gown, not unlike a wedding dress, now soaked in blood. A fringed bonnet managed to stay tied around her head, and, as I watched, holding my breath, she inched her head toward us. "Oh, fuck," Dwayne whispered as he approached Tommy and me. "She's alive." Tommy took a few deep breaths and paced back towards the car, his hands on his head, and then, without turning back to us, he spoke. His voice was cold, commanding. "Put her in the car." "I'm not touching her," Dwayne said. I looked back to the poor girl. She wasn't moving, just staring, right at me. I did this to her. "We need to get help," I said, transfixed at the sight of blood pooling around her. "We shouldn't move her. What if we make it worse?" It was like hearing someone else talk through me. I couldn't have spoken. Those words meant nothing to me. Tom had turned back to Dwayne and me and charged the two of us, huffing through his nose. "You," he said, shoving Dwayne towards the girl. "And you," he said, shoving me even harder. "Go grab her and put her in the goddamn car." His jaw trembled as he gritted his teeth. I couldn't decide if it was out of fear or rage. Dwayne stumbled over to the girl as Thomas stared a hole through my soul. I knew if I didn't help Dwayne, it wasn't going to end well for me, so I obeyed. "We're taking her to the hospital, right?" Jessa asked. She was bracing herself against the car, as if her legs were giving out. Thomas said nothing, marching to the driver's side of the Camino. "The hospital, right?" Jessie repeated. The concern in her voice was unmistakable. "Yeah," Tommy muttered, sitting back down. I lifted the girl's feet as Dwayne carefully heaved her torso upward. At this, the girl's head rolled to the side, revealing a sizable red spot seeping through the bonnet just above her ear. The stain traveled all the way down her cheek and oozed out onto her neck from the cloth. Dwayne refused to look at it, or me, as we carried the girl to the Camino. He just stared down at the gravel, watching his feet as we shuffled closer. She was heavier than she looked, like carrying sheets of roofing tile. Jess had popped open the back door of the car, which pulled Dwayne's attention from the road. "Whoa, whoa, whoa, hold on," Dwayne protested, stopping just short of the Camino. "If she's going back there, where are we going to sit?" I wanted so badly to drop the girl's feet, but I knew that as long as Dwayne was holding her, I couldn't. As guilty as I felt for thinking it, considering what I was carrying, I didn't want to look weak in front of Jessie. Or, even worse at that moment, Tommy. "Put her in the trunk," Thomas said, just loud enough for us to hear. "Tommy," Jessie began, but didn't finish. Dwayne took a step back in compliance, pulling at the girl to get me moving, and then I felt, just enough to sink my stomach, the poor girl's leg twitch. "Stop." I looked back into the girl's eyes. They were fixed on me. She was at our mercy. My mercy. It didn't matter if it pissed Tommy off. "Back seat," I ordered Dwayne. "Come on." Thomas stepped out of the car again, but I kept my eyes on Dwayne. I heard the gravel crunch beneath Tom's steel-toed boots as he approached us. My arms were going numb under the weight of the girl, and I felt them starting to shake. But I needed Dwayne on my side. I couldn't put the girl in the trunk. I wouldn't. Thomas shoved a key into the lock of the trunk and yanked the lid open. He then turned around to face me, grabbing one of the girl's legs and forcing his line of sight into my own. "It's my fucking car, and she's going in the fucking trunk." It wasn't Tommy's car, though. It was Jessie's. But I wasn't about to bring that up. As much as my forearms hurt, I tightened my grip on the girl's legs. "What if we get pulled over?" I said, my fingers slipping from the sweat. "We robbed a liquor store, your window smashed, and you want me to throw a dying girl in the trunk?" Tommy's eyes darted from my own to my hands, to the girl's dress, and then back to me. He raised a hand to wipe the sweat from his lip. He opened his mouth, but Dwayne spoke first. "Maybe Steve's right," he said, and Tommy turned to face him. "If someone finds this girl, bleeding out, in the trunk..." Tommy looked back to the girl again, and then quickly down at the road. After a moment of agonizing silence, he let go of the girl's leg and slammed the trunk shut. "I guess she's sitting in your lap then." As Tommy walked back to the driver's seat, Jessie stepped to me and took the girl's other leg, and not a moment too soon. "Come on," Jessie said, and the three of us slid the girl into the back seat. I inched my way in after her, lifting her legs into my lap. Dwayne followed suit on the other side, resting the girl's head and shoulders on his thighs. With the way she was propped up, there was no mistaking the fact that she was still staring at me. I looked away as soon as I noticed, but not before the corner of her lips curled into a wince. Or, as it looked in my peripheral view, a crooked smile. Thomas started the car up again, and the radio kicked on. "Six tight on the disco." Jessie didn't let the lyric play out before she cranked the volume down to a bleak silence. It was funny. I hadn't realized we were listening to a cassette tape. No wonder Jessie knew all the words. "Shoulda just kicked the window out," Tommy muttered just under his breath as he picked up speed. "Can't see shit." I looked back at the girl, to her dress, to the blood pooling in the seat beneath her, and then back to her face. Her eyes had closed. "Was she just out there? Alone?" Jessie asked, turning to face the three of us. "Must have been," Dwayne said. "Didn't see no one else out there." "But why was she alone? Who just walks around the road by themselves in the middle of the night?" Jessie gave the girl's outfit another scan. She reached out like she wanted to touch it, but decided against it. "Dressed like that," Jessie finished, lowering her hand. It's true, it was weird. The girl was wearing a white lace gown, now grayed from the pavement, with wrinkled frayed sleeves extending just beyond her forearms. She was also barefoot, the bottoms of her feet caked in dry mud like she'd been walking through the woods for hours, or through a ditch. "Maybe she's one of those Southern Amish or something," Dwayne guessed, adjusting his legs beneath the girl's upper half. There are no Southern Amish, Jesse said. That doesn't make any sense. Will you two shut the fuck up? Tommy interjected. What difference does it make? The girl's leg twitched again, harder this time. Through the outline from the hanging gown, I could trace the shape of her legs, and one of them was bent the hell up, like a doll's leg, a doll a child had cast aside. I looked at her arms, her wrists. It was obvious they were broken. How far is the hospital from here? I asked, checking one of the snapped wrists for a pulse. Jesus Christ, Dwayne said, apparently seeing her wrist for the first time. Few more miles, Tommy mumbled. I felt a soft pulse and sat her wrist back into the seat. I looked at Dwayne, who nodded his head toward the girl's feet. I looked back down to see one of her big toes throbbing up and down, bending and pointing. Then, the toenail started scratching at my door. I wished more than anything for it to stop. Pull her leg back, said Dwayne after a few moments of the scratching. I can't, I said, laying a hand on the girl's foot. It's broken. The scratching got faster. By the look of it, the girl's toenails hadn't been clipped for months. Well, do something, Jesse said, staring out the window. I can't take much more of that. I patted the girl's foot with my hand, as if to say, it's going to be okay. But the bending and scratching with her toe only worsened. And then, though I wish I hadn't, I looked up at her face. There, looking back at me, unmistakably, was a bloody smile, teeth and all. At that, I pushed the girl's foot away from the passenger door, which pulled the hem of her gown up her leg just enough for me to catch the edge of something written on her skin, barely visible by the occasional streetlight. A word wrapped around her ankle. A tattoo. I glanced back to Dwayne. He was looking out the window, clearly pretending a dying girl wasn't sprawled across his lap. After I was certain nobody was looking, I lifted the hem of the girl's gown with my pinky finger and brushed it back up her leg a bit more, revealing not a word, but words, sentences, paragraphs of unintelligible text. In Italian. No, Greek. No. Something else. Words after words of nonsense. You fucking perv! Dwayne yelled beside me, and I jerked the gown back over the girl's leg. No, it's not. What's going on back there? Tommy asked, eyeing me through the rear-view mirror. This little horn dog's copping a feel, Dwayne barked, leaning over to shove me into the car door. Jessie turned in her seat to face me, horror etched in her expression. Stephen, are you serious? She asked, sniffling a bit. The blood rushed back to my face. I stammered. No, she's got... I took a deep breath. Tattoos. Everywhere. Yeah, well, you'd know, huh? Dwayne sneered. I could tell he was getting off calling me out, or distracting from the reality of what we were doing. No, I mean, she's got weird ones all over her legs. Look. I pulled back the gown again, only a little further this time, noticing how high the tattoos were coming from. My eyes flickered between Jessie and the girl. To my relief, Jessie was looking at the girl's legs. What the fuck? Dwayne said, staring, and then he pulled up one of the sleeves of the girl's gown. What? Tommy asked, turning his head to us and back, periodically. It's all over her arms, too, Dwayne said, tracing a finger over the tattoos covering the girl's bicep. Bunch of weird words. Mors, to, ga, gay, vita, ku, vina. Well, don't read it, Jessie yelled, reaching over to pull the girl's sleeve back down. Why not? Dwayne yelled back, imitating Jessie's tone. We hit her with our car. I don't think she gives a fuck. Just stop. You're freaking me out. Have any of you seen her? I gulped. Looking at us? Huh? Dwayne looked down, but the girl had long closed her eyes. The hell do you mean? I looked at Jessie. She seemed just as clueless as Dwayne. The girl keeps looking at me. She keeps smiling. After a lengthy pause, Dwayne forced out a laugh. You're fucking nuts. I wasn't sure, but I felt the car speed up a bit. She looked at you? Jessie asked, eyeing the girl and waving a hand out in front of her face. You mean when we found her? Dwayne said. In the road, right? I shook my head. Here, in the car. in your lap." Dwayne and Jesse eyed each other, gauging each other's reactions. Neither had any idea what I was talking about. I cleared my throat, or what was left in it at least. "You never saw that?" I felt my tongue swelling. I needed a drink. "She's got ink on her chest, too," Dwayne said, cutting the silence we were all stewing in for what felt like an eternity. "All the way up to her neckline, under the dress." The girl's leg twitched again. All three of us noticed it that time. "I don't like this," Jessa said. "Something's not right." She turned back to face the front of the vehicle. "Wait, Tommy," Jessa said, looking back and forth from her window to the windshield. "You passed the hospital." "Passed it a little ways back," Thomas said, staring ahead. I could tell he was chewing on the inside of his cheek, and I realized he'd been quiet for a little while. "What the hell, man?" Dwayne yelled, shifting around from beneath the girl. Who are those people?" Jessa asked, looking out the window. I glanced out my own and watched as we passed 3 tall men in black gowns, similar to what the girl was wearing. They were staring at us from the side of the road, pointing at the car as we sped by. "I don't know," Thomas said, tapping on the steering wheel with his pointer finger. "But those aren't the first of them. While the 3 of you were blabbing and touching her ink, I started seeing them, 1 or 2 at a time at first, pointing at us from the roadside." Thomas took a deep, long breath, his eyes bouncing from the road to his mirrors. "There's a lot of them," he mumbled, wiping his forehead. I looked out the back window as the 3 men faded into the night, watching us speed away. "I think they're with her," Thomas finished. "Jesus Christ," Dwayne said, looking out his own window. "Who the fuck did we hit?" "About 10 of them were waiting in front of the hospital," Thomas continued, his voice now a monotone hum. "Right outside the entrance. They were waiting on us to get there. I didn't know what to do, but pulling in seemed like a bad idea." "You think they want to hurt us?" I asked, to nobody in particular. "Maybe they want to hurt her," said Dwayne. "They're all in black. She's in white. She was all alone." "Do you think she was running from them?" I asked Jesse, looking at me for an answer, for some reason. But before I could guess, Thomas tapped the brakes, hard. It was almost enough to roll the girl off of Dwayne and me, if we hadn't both grabbed her. "Fucking bullshit," Thomas spat, and the rest of us looked out to the road. Several men and women in black gowns were now standing in the road, all pointing at us as Thomas swerved around them, blaring his horn. "We gotta get the fuck out of here," Dwayne said, his voice a pitch higher than usual. "The hell do you think I'm trying to do?" Thomas growled, straightening the Camino out to drive clear down the center of the road, straddling the yellow dividing lines. But the black gowns were still appearing. We passed 3 more of them in the next few moments, 6 more in the next minute. They were standing closer and closer to the center of the road, to the point where we'd collide with some of them if any one of us opened a door. "What do you want?" Jesse cried as Thomas zigzagged through another handful of pointers. "If you ask me one more time, I'm throwing you out the fucking car," Thomas said through his teeth. "One more word from any of you, and—" Thomas slammed on the brakes again. A line of black gowns stood in front of us, stretching across the road, 7 of them in total, all holding hands with one another, all staring at us with wide eyes. In the beam of the Camino's still headlights, I realized that the black gowns were split vertically down the middle, exposing the naked torsos of the men and women beneath them, exposing the legs, the bare feet, the genitals, everything. Thomas threw the Camino in reverse, but to our horror, a second line of black gowns had formed behind us. None of us said a word as Thomas slowly put the car in park, turned the key off, and took a deep breath. "Get her the fuck out of this car," he said to Dwayne and I, with a quiet intensity that might as well have been punctuated with a knife. Jessie did nothing but shake as she stared out front towards the dozen eyes staring back. They did not blink. They did not move. "Fuck you! I'm not opening the door," Dwayne said, pressing the mechanical lock down and securing it in place. "They're obviously following us because of her," Jessie yelled, still watching the black gowns in front of us. "Get her out!" I wanted to say something, anything, but I couldn't. How did this happen? Why'd I ever get in the car with them? Because of Jessie. Because I wanted to seem cool. Tommy threw his door open for the third time that night and leaped to Dwayne's side, nearly ripping the handle off his door before pounding on the window until it practically gave out. "I'm gonna kick the shit out of you, Dwayne!" Tommy yelled, before rounding the back of the Camino and heading towards my door. I looked out at the line of cloaked bodies staring back at us. I heard Tommy kicking up gravel and swearing as he reached my side of the car. I didn't lock my door. Maybe I was too scared. Maybe I wanted the girl out of the car too. Tommy yanked my door open and grabbed me by the shirt, pulling me out of the vehicle and tossing me to the ground. From the pavement, I looked back into the Camino at Dwayne, who was hanging his head off to the side, and then at the girl, who still wouldn't take her eyes off of me. Tommy grabbed the girl by her legs and pulled her from Dwayne's lap. Her leg twitched again, but Tommy didn't seem to notice or care. He dragged her out of the car and dropped her to the pavement beside me. But as he turned to head back to the driver's seat, the girl grabbed his pant leg with her broken fingers. Tommy looked down at her and shook his leg, but she didn't let go. He looked back at the line of black gowns, who now marched towards us, and he sent a heavy kick right to the girl's face. And yet, her hand still clutched the hem of his jeans. Tommy glanced at me, quickly pulling his view back to the girl, and he stomped her again. This time, her grasp loosened. Without hesitation, Tommy leaped into the driver's seat again, slammed the door behind him, and started the Camino. I had no choice but to jump back into the car, wiping the gravel off my hands and onto my jeans. I looked again at the swarm of gowns. To my horror, the lines of eyes were closing in around us. We had maybe 20 yards until they reached us. Tommy revved the engine, yelling at the interlocked people to clear a space, but they didn't. Instead, they started singing, all in the same operatic pitch, and all through open, smiling mouths. A softer voice then joined in the chorus. To my right, through the window, I saw the dying girl sprawled out across the road. She was once again staring at me, smiling, and singing along. Tommy shifted gears and revved harder. Just say you will, just do what you feel, I'm for real. I just noticed the music had started again with the car. Go, Tommy! Jesse screamed. Do it! Punch it! Yelled Dwayne, and Tommy threw the Camino into drive. We were off. Wait! I yelled, but it was too late. In seconds, we had run clear through 4 of the black gowns, spraying bodies like bowling pins in our wake. The music's full of joy and laughter, and it's such a thrill. Woo! Tommy cried out as we sped off into the night. The other 2 were laughing and cheering too, mostly out of nerves, I assumed. I didn't know what to feel. I turned to look at the wreckage behind us, but the black gowns were impossible to spot against the dark backdrop of the night. I couldn't even see the girl we had hit. I say, Dwayne began, cracking another beer. We drive to the next gas station? No, 2 gas stations down and... We're going to the next town, Tommy interrupted, hitting the gas a little harder. And I'm not stopping till we get there. I don't care what we... Deer! Jesse screamed as a single doe skipped across the road, stopping right in front of the Camino to stare us down. Tommy hit the brakes, but not before clipping the creature and swerving off of the road, and into the ditch. The impact was quick. Music's tight, music's tight, music's tight. I came to as the tape began to skip, or maybe it had been skipping for some time. I didn't even know they could do that. The car lay motionless, yet it was still spinning all the same, and there was an odd pain behind my eyes, like someone was lightly pressing on them from the inside. I went to rub them, and felt a jolt in my shoulders. I could barely turn my head. Music's tight, music's tight, music's tight, music's. No one else was moving. Is everyone? I began, but stopped at the sight of Dwayne. His head had been thrown through the window. He was draped over the door, immobile. It was tough to say how much blood in his seat was his, or how much belonged to the girl in the white gown. Tommy was crumpled into the driver's side floorboard, dead. Music's tight, music's tight, music's tight. The song was slowing down, and if it wasn't my imagination, the words were getting louder. I knew cassette players couldn't do that. Stephen? Jesse whimpered. I couldn't see her from behind her seat. I lifted myself up to the best I could, but still. "Yeah," I groaned. "You okay?" "I hit my head," she said, and left it at that. I reached for my door and pulled the handle. Because of the angle of the Camino, the door opened on its own. I took a deep breath and pulled myself out, collapsing into the dirt in the process. "Music's tight, music's tight." "Hang on," I called up at Jesse, realizing my shoulder had been dislocated in the crash. I couldn't see anything beyond a dim glow coming from the buried headlights of the Camino. "I'm coming," I said, through gritted teeth, attempting to stand as I clutched my limp arm. And then, the singing began again. That horrible, dreadful singing. Like an opera with no words. Haunting. Ceaseless. Coming from every direction. Music's tight. As my eyes struggled to adjust to the darkness, shapes began to form. Cloaked figures. Naked bodies. White eyes. Dozens of fingers. Pointing at me. Music's tight. Jess's sobs barely cut through the monotonous wailing. Still, I could hear them. God help me, through it all I could hear them. Even through the sound of Dwayne's and Tommy's doors opening, and their bodies being pulled out, I could hear them. To the backdrop of her screams, through the hellish ambience of the choir as it moved in on me. I wished I had never kissed Jesse Palmer. Corey Lamb is a writer hailing from the murky depths of Baytown, Texas. Holding a degree in physics and punching a clock to pay the bills, Lamb breaks through the monotony by writing horror in his spare time. Though he has self-published several short titles under a pen name, The Girl in the Car marks the first piece of fiction published under Lamb's actual name. He is currently working on his first full-length novel,